Next on our agenda is the opening of the network meeting by co-chairs. Please welcome Madam Siti Norlailasari Abdul Rahman, Senior Director of the Strategy Planning Division at Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry of Malaysia, and Mr. Mark Steele, Director of Regulatory System, Office of the Chief Executive Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment of New Zealand. Please give a quick round of applause to Madam Siti and Mark. And I am now going to give the floor to Ms. Siti and Mark to handle the opening session. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. A warm welcome to everyone of you here and also online to the vibrant and beautiful city of Bangkok. It's truly an honor to be here today, to be the co-chair for the 8th ASEAN-OECD GRPN meeting, together with my colleague, Mr. Mark Steele of New Zealand. It's nice to finally see everyone face-to-face after being online for the last several GRPN meetings, though it was interesting as well to see and hear the presentations that were presented in the last couple of years. Firstly, I would like to extend our gratitude to our colleagues at the Office of the Council of State of Thailand, and also Ms. Elsa Pilichowski, Director of the Public Governance Directorate of OECD, for their insight. We are extremely grateful to the Office of Council of State of Thailand for graciously hosting this year's GRPN meeting and finally making this event a reality after virtual engagements of several years. As mentioned, in these unprecedented times marked by the challenges that I think most of our countries are facing in recovering from the COVID pandemic, it's indeed nice to be gathered here, looking at each other's faces and also hearing presentations and hopefully presenting questions to get more clarification on some of the presentations that will be presented later. I think the disruptions of the past several years have highlighted the importance of international collaborations and forums like the ASEAN-OECD GRPN even more. This meeting, I think, will serve as a crucial nexus for enhancing greater international regulatory cooperation. So this year's GRPN builds on some of the momentum that has been presented in the previous meetings, where we were more focusing on building back and recovering after the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to hearing about the things that will be done or shared by our colleagues in the role of how we see regulatory policy will enhance in helping us cope with the sustainable development challenges. So let us listen and also learn on how GRP can propel us towards a future that's not only resilient but also conducive to sustainable development. The theme, I think, underscores the crucial importance of cultivating good regulatory practices as a foundation in steering our countries towards sustainable growth, fostering greater innovation, and also a society that embodies not only inclusivity but balance in the society. I would like to share that I think our colleagues in the ASEAN Secretariat have developed the ASEAN Handbook for GRP. It was issued in December 2022, and I think this serves as a reference point for regulators in the ASEAN member states in implementing GRP. So allow me to share a little bit about what Malaysia has been doing in GRP. We have been looking at initiatives under the My Mudah initiative to look at projects supporting sustainable development in terms of dealing with licensings for new things like electric vehicle charging stations. So my colleagues from MPC have been working to improve, to develop a framework on electric charging stations to try and reduce the approval time by 54%. So previously it was 13 months because there were various authorities that had to be consulted in developing these charging stations. Now we have reduced it down to 6 months. So we have also learned from the OECD, and we have been working on implementing behavioral insights, which has been included in our 5-year plan in the the 5-year Malaysia plan. So we have been working on initiatives to enhance on delivering policies using behavioral insights, and I think further details will be shared by my colleague from MPC in the plenary too. Also, please allow me to express our gratitude to the ASEAN Secretariat and the UK Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy for their contributions in making this year's event possible. Their commitment in making the GRPN success, I think, is important in fostering a more international platform for meaningful discussion and collaboration. So I look forward to a fruitful and hopefully enriching discussions from the presentations, which will, I hope, all of us learn from to improve our GRP and also our policies in our respective countries. So I hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Siti. I too would like to express my thanks to the Office of the Council of State of Thailand and to Ms. Pilichowski, both for their opening remarks, and to the Office of the Council of State for generously hosting this year's GRPN, which, as Madam Siti and the opening speakers have noted, is the first in-person meeting since 2019. While we have been able to have productive discussions online over the last few years, they are not quite the same thing as the opportunities that we have from meeting here in person and being able to have informal discussions as well as informal ones. So it really is very good to be here. And I think it is, as previous speakers have pointed out, very timely, especially with COP28 meeting as we speak, to focus on these issues of regulatory policy and environmental sustainability, and regulatory policy more broadly adapting to the needs of society as a whole. Our countries may be at different stages of development, but we face common challenges. We face common challenges in designing effective regulation in a more complex world, and in meeting the expectations of all of our societies for regulation that is responsive and inclusive to all of our communities. I think that these conversations are a great opportunity for both ASEAN and OECD members to share our thinking about how we are going to meet these challenges, and these conversations will be an important contribution to the development of the agenda. I invite all delegates to participate actively in the sessions today. You will see that there are microphones placed around the room here, and that is so that delegates can make interventions and ask questions during the plenary sessions. And you can go to one of the freestanding mics. So please, everyone, feel free to participate as we move through the day today. And with that, I return to you, Madam Siti.
Thank you, Mark. So for today's agenda, we will host we'll have 3 plenary sessions and also 1 roundtable discussion. These will cover various topics under the theme of regulate to elevate, the role of regulatory policy in promoting sustainable development. I believe we have 17 speakers who will be representing both regional and country perspectives. They will share their initiatives on regulations supporting sustainability, designing those regulations with people in mind, and also utilizing digitalization in regulatory delivery. The speakers will cover the following topics: better regulations for environmental sustainability, placing people at the center of regulatory policy, leveraging digital and data-driven regulatory approaches to support a more sustainable future. This is particularly a challenging area in getting the right kind of data. Assessing good regulatory practices initiatives across our countries in Southeast Asia. So I hope that these presentations will inspire further innovations and improvements in our regulatory reforms in our member states for our further progress. So now may I invite all the moderators and presenters to join us on stage. Can I invite all the presenters as well, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from New Zealand, and oh, the other one is virtual, and from Thailand as well. Okay. Okay, before we start, I think today we are at the critical juncture of some of the pressing challenges of our times in terms of environmental challenges. So I think there is an urgency for immediate action to be taken by our respective countries and leaders and us as policymakers and regulatory experts to act decisively and as quickly as possible to face the environmental challenge. Regulatory policy has often been considered as the backbone of governance and has emerged, I think, as an effective and potent tool to effectively address some of the environmental crises and achieve our policy objectives. Today, I think we are at the cusp of change. We need to recognize that the traditional scope of GRP needs to evolve and adapt. We need to broaden our perspective from a purely economic-based focus, and I think to embrace a more holistic view and incorporate the importance of environmental values and also social values in developing our regulations and policies. So it's hoped that this session will explore how different countries are adopting regulatory frameworks and deploying innovative regulatory practices to confront environmental challenges that are being faced by us. So we are privileged this morning to have a panel of distinguished experts who will share their insights on how they are coping with environmental challenges and share their experiences. So the presentations will include better regulations for the green transition from the OECD, Thailand's experience on environmental and regulatory policy, sustainable finance in ASEAN, which will be presented by our colleague from Singapore, who will be joining us virtually, the APEC or OECD RC resource presented by our colleague from New Zealand, and also Indonesia's experience in developing a blue economy framework and roadmap. Before we start, may I remind you that, as Mark mentioned, we encourage questions from the audience. Please chip in, but I think if we can keep it maybe at the end, after all the presentations, it would be much easier for the presenters to reply. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Daniel Trinker, Deputy Head of the Regulatory Policy Division of the OECD. Daniel.
Thank you very much, Madam Siti, for the introduction. This makes my job really easier to moderate this session. Before I start, I would also like to extend our thanks on behalf of the OECD to the Thai government and especially to the Office of Council and State for organizing this event in this wonderful setting. It's a great pleasure for us to be here. I would also like to thank my colleague Supriya Trivedi, who is standing in the back of the room, for spending her last at least 3 months, if not more, working on organizing this event. I know it's not been easy, so this pays off hopefully in having this wonderful event today. Because we have on the agenda 5 distinguished speakers in the panel, I need, without further ado, to give the floor to the first speaker, which happens to be me. My name is Daniel Trnka. I'm a deputy head of the OECD Regulatory Policy Division, and I have a difficult task to introduce in 10 minutes our work in the area of better regulation for the green transition. So I will really give you a quick run through our recent report that was published a few weeks ago on the role of better regulation for the green transition. And if you have any questions later on, I will be happy to answer them. So if we can put the presentation on the screen. I might start in the meantime. Better regulation plays a very important role in achieving government's objectives, whether it's in the area of environment, digital transformation, or any other area governments might to pursue. For the burning issue of environmental protection, which is a priority basically for every single government right now around the globe, regulations really plays a crucial role. We are not able to achieve environmental goals without making our regulations right and regulatory policy. Regulations are one of the key government tools to achieve their goals, along with financial instruments like taxes, subsidies, etc. And therefore, we need to really take good care of the quality of our regulations if we want to protect our environment. On top of that, environmental protection is a global issue, of course. Air pollution doesn't stop at the border. River pollution doesn't stop at the border. And therefore, we need to work globally to strengthen regulatory quality and international regulatory cooperation to be able to effectively protect the environment globally. The recently published paper on better regulation for the green transition that I have just mentioned covers many elements of regulatory policy and the role they play in the green transition process and in achieving regulatory goals. And I would like to structure my presentation exactly around those elements. First, let me start with the process of developing new regulations and analyzing environmental impacts as part of the process of developing new regulations, especially regulatory impact assessment. Nowadays, a majority of OECD countries claim that they assess environmental impacts when developing new laws and regulations. In reality, we know that this is not 100% the case. In fact, there is guidance missing. Public officials often do not know how to evaluate environmental impacts, and many countries make the mistake of focusing only on, if you will, environmental regulations. So those regulations that are usually coming from ministries of environment or environmental protection agencies. However, the biggest impact on environment have regulations that might come from other ministries, such as the Ministry of Industry or the Ministry of Transport. And we need to really strengthen the guidance and analytical capacities in those ministries so they would be able to efficiently evaluate environmental impacts. And we need to make it obligatory and strengthen regulatory oversight in this sense. We talked about ex-ante reviews, but we also need to talk about ex-post reviews, reviewing the existing regulatory stock. Now we know that as we call it in the OECD, ex-post reviews of regulations is an unwanted child of regulatory policy. Not many countries, even in the OECD, have a working system of ongoing ex-post reviews of the existing stock of regulations. Nowadays, it is even more important because with the environmental threats, we really need to look at the existing laws and regulations with a green lens. Nowadays, only 1/4 of OECD countries have a systematic requirements to conduct ex-post reviews. We need to make them more regular, more systematic, and more frequent, also in light of other developments such as innovations and new technologies being introduced. Another important element of regulatory policy is stakeholder engagement. And again, when achieving environmental objectives, we really need to involve all stakeholders, including those that might be less willing or less able to be part of the policy making or regulation making process. So governments need to be more proactive to reach out to those groups that might suffer from the green transition. They need to talk more to young people who, as we all know, might be slightly less willing to actively participate in government's operation and in the process of developing new laws. But they are the ones who really care about the future, of course, because for us, old people, it's not, it is important, of course, to protect the environment, but if there is a major environmental crisis in 50 years, I will not be there to live through it, but the young people will, and therefore they really need to be made part of the process, of the regulation making process, and actively engaged in the regulation making process. And if I said that ex-post reviews are an unwanted child of regulatory policy, regulatory delivery, including enforcement, inspections, compliance promotions, it is something that many people do not even know that it is part of the better regulation toolbox. So it's a child that many people do not know exists. And we need to make regulatory delivery really better if we want to achieve environmental goals. Madam Siti made a great example of building a charging station for electric vehicles. If we want to promote the use of electric vehicles, and if it takes more than 1 year to get all the licenses and permits for building a charging station, well, it will make the process of the uptake of electric vehicles really more and more difficult. We need to make the process of enforcement and inspections, regulatory delivery as we call it, more risk-based. We need to focus on our priorities, and in the licensing and permitting process really speed up the process to enable environmental friendly technologies and processes to be introduced more quickly. Okay, it's moving now. I've already mentioned that the environment is a global issue and that the pollution doesn't stop at the border. Yet, as you can see, only few OECD countries actually analyze impacts on foreign jurisdictions and engage in international regulatory cooperation fora, such as the OECD, but many other international organizations. And then again, to effectively protect the environment on our planet, we need to think globally and we need to cooperate globally, even in regulating. It doesn't make any sense that every single country adopts different regulations in the environmental sphere and in many other areas as well. I mean, we talked a little bit yesterday about regulating artificial intelligence. It's pretty much the same. It doesn't make any sense for every country to create their own regulation, to create heterogeneity across the globe. The cooperation needs to be strengthened. So in a nutshell, let me slowly start to wrap up my presentation. What is the future of regulating for the green transition? We need to foster an inclusive and coordinated approach to regulatory management tools. We need to make the use of regulatory management tools, and I'm speaking about regulatory impact assessment, stakeholder engagement, ex-post reviews, we need to make them more agile. to be maybe more experimental, to support outcome-based regulations, to really regularly review the existing stock of regulations with a green lens. We need to move away from a process-oriented to outcome-based and risk and behavior-informed approach. We really need to take into account how regulated subjects, our citizens, but also companies, small and medium enterprises, will behave when regulated. What will be the real life impacts of regulations? We need to go global. I've already talked a lot about it, and we need to change the paradigm of regulatory policy, because regulatory policy in many cases is perceived as something like deregulation, removing regulatory burdens. But we actually have the possibility to use regulations as an asset to achieve government's goals, especially in the environmental sphere. We say at the end of the paper and at the end of this presentation that further research is required to better understand OECD countries' practices. And I am happy that in cooperation with the Korean government, we are now working already on the second phase of a joint project that focuses exactly on this topic, better regulation for the green transition. We do not have any time to go deeper, but let me just mention that the paper I've just talked about is a result of our cooperation with the Korean government, and we are really grateful to the government of South Korea for supporting this groundbreaking work. But right now we are working on something that we like to call a stress testing methodology. What does that mean? We want to produce a toolkit that would enable countries and the OECD to look at national regulatory policy framework with a green lens. So exactly what I talked about. Are your regulatory management tools ready for the green transition? Do you analyze regular environmental impacts? Do you review your stock of regulations regularly with a green lens? Do you cooperate globally with other countries and with international organizations? Is your regulatory delivery system based on risk? Do you have space for introducing more outcome-based regulations? We are right now in the process of developing this framework. We would be happy to test it, not just in Korea, but in other countries. Hopefully we will get an opportunity, but I just wanted to quickly mention this very important project. I realize I run over time, so I don't want to take the time from other speakers as a moderator. For the moment, thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to respond to any questions later. And now, if you allow me, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Siranan Dechakup. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Researcher from the Thai Development Research Institute, who will provide a presentation on Thailand's work on intertwining environmental consideration within regulatory policy. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm waiting for my slide. Okay. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the OECDs for graciously hosting this event and inviting TDI to participate. Additionally, I would like to extend thanks to the OECD, ASEAN, and the audience for your presence and engagement. Okay, please allow me to begin with the key message. The three key messages I will present today. The first, the presentation will begin with Thailand's good regulatory practice as a national agenda and how we implement those principles into the framework of law and regulation, which is still process-based. Next, I would like to shed a light on environmental cases involving Thailand, which present cross-border policy and transboundary nature of environmental regulation. And the last one, I will propose certain regulatory bodies can significantly contribute to advance environmental agenda, which is to be more mission and outcome-based. Next, first I could say that Thailand is still in its early stage regarding the integration of GRP within its regulatory system. There are two primary legislation concerning GRP in Thailand. First, the Constitution, and the second, the Law Evaluation Act. Its name is a bit longer on the presentation. And Thailand has substantially embraced the GRP principle through its most recent Constitution, enacted in 2017, which is quite fresh. And board principle concerning GRP has been laid down by Article 77, and this article aligns with most of the fundamental principles outlined in ASEAN guidelines on GRP. There are key elements stated in the Constitution, such as the state should introduce law only to the extent of necessity, and if some laws are obstacle to the livelihood of business, the state holds an obligation to repeal or revise such law. And moreover, they also mention that prior to enactment or when the law has enacted, the procedure should be taken, such as conducting consultation with stakeholders, analyzing impacts that may occur from the law systematically, undertaking an evaluation of the outcome of the law at every specific period of time, disclose the result of the consultation and analysis to the public. All of this clearly reflects GRP principle in the Constitution. On the other hand, the Law Evaluation Act come out in 2019. It provides detail for the Article 77 and stipulate a 5-year period counting from the time law has been enacted to review the law. So the majority of the laws and regulations are lined up to complete the assessment between this year to 2025. It seems that we have to wait for the assessment to determine the success of GRP rule and its process based. However, one of the potential issues that may arise in the current GRP tools in Thailand is fragmentation. Given that the law evaluation are conducted within the same act or within sectors, while environmental law and regulation could span across over various sectors. For example, one of TDI research project, we are evaluating capital market law, which is not environmental law yet. The stakeholder and regulator prioritize consideration only regarding costs and benefits. Although Thailand have an agenda focused on achieving net zero, it hasn't been raised within this context because capital market regulators aren't aligned with environmental regulation yet. Therefore, in the upcoming topics, I will highlight current issues, such as a mechanism that could further enhance environmental regulation in more broad sectors. Case studies on transboundary issues, I select for 3 cases. These 3 cases share several commonalities. They involve a transboundary nature that require regional cooperation, and they are all have empirical evidence for all cases demonstrating the negative impact on the environment, health, and community, and all of them have got active involvement from civil society. More importantly, they also coordinate policy across sectors because beyond just the environmental domain. First case is the Sayaburi Dam case. The project construction is in Laos, actually, but they are for electricity export to Thailand with Thai investment involvement. Even the dam is not built in Thailand, it also raises the question to the civil society on Thai energy policy and credit policy which governs investment banks. And the second case is PM 2.5 case. Due to the transboundary nature of dust, the drafted law incorporates cross-border mechanisms such as supply chain due diligence, which is a tool originating from the corporate sector. Additionally, if you want to manage other sources of dust, it requires involvement from various sectors, such as energy, transport, agriculture, and more. The last case was a climate change case. Developing climate change legislation serves as a prime example of learning regulatory design, employing an interdisciplinary approach, which is aligned with GRP principle. However, climate change law also involves a wide range of policy, from social policy to economic policies, using cooperation among agencies and regional cooperation. In conclusion, these 3 cases demonstrate the limitation of domestic regulation in handling cross-sector policy and transboundary matters. They consistently review fragmentation in cooperation between officials, sometimes even within the committee established to address the issues. And to address cross-sector policy require administrative mechanism, which I will propose in the next part. We could harness the administrative mechanism to, I like to talk about in TDI. TDI is a think tank conducting research project mostly for governmental agencies and as their consultant. We have found that each agency aims to fulfill their mission safely, like aiming to pass state audits, achieving positive KPIs, and adhere to procurement regulation, which is, if we were to incorporate an environmental agenda, perhaps within the Constitution, or if we are going to amend it for real, or perhaps with a strong political commitment, the 4 regulators on the presentation could potentially create a space for the agency they inspect to prioritize environmental initiative in their mission. These regulators may be called by different names across the countries, so I use a general term that indicates their function rather than their specific names. The Public Procurement Agency, by introducing green public procurement, would prompt other agencies to prioritize environmental friendly product or service over the price and other conditions. State audit. Frankly, this agency is frequently mentioned when I interview other agencies. Most of them are quite apprehensive about fulfilling their mission slightly beyond their scopes, especially under inspection from state audits. Therefore, if the state audit integrates environmental agendas and permit other agencies to accommodate environmental mission, it would establish better practice on environmental regulation, even they are not in environmental sector. Local finance, the detail might vary among nations, but Thailand possesses an agency that are capable of providing communities with funds that align with the agenda set by the governor. In other words, establishing an environmental agenda into those funds could facilitate local environmental projects and boost the involvement of civil society. The last one I will talk about the government KPIs. The KPI assessors could establish key benchmarks for environmental agendas, and this would incentivize other agencies to integrate environmental regulation into their mission. Furthermore, regulatory bodies with similar functions and responsibility are common across most countries. International cooperation can be established, especially among these agencies, to share and exchange their practice focused on the environmental agenda or environmental issues in region. For example, regional and global cooperation regarding state audits are already in place, namely the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institution, or INTUSI, of United Nations, or the ASEAN-OECD, which consists of Supreme Audit Institution in ASEAN. I would skip this. Okay. And I would like to conclude my presentation that Thailand is still in its early stage of implementing its GRP procedure, yet the challenge of cross-sectorial policy and transboundary nature of environmental law need more comprehensive measures to ensure effective regulation. Thus, it is important to incorporate environmental agenda into administrative governance for regulators. This integration could directly influence on the mission and finance of other agencies. Additionally, fostering regional and global network among those regulators are essentials. And that concludes my presentation. I delight to engage in a discussion, and if there's something on your mind, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dechakut, for a wonderful presentation that only confirms that it is very timely to integrate good regulatory practices with the green transition and with environmental policies. Our next speaker is joining us virtually, and therefore I would like to turn the floor to Mr. Eugene Wong, CEO of the Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, who will cover topics related to good regulatory practices for advancing sustainable finance in ASEAN. Hopefully everything.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much for having me here. So I think the video may be emphasizing me a bit too much. My apologies for not being able to join physically owing to COP28. So without further ado, if I can just get on to my presentation. Thank you very much. I would like to share today a slightly different angle, which is how regulatory influence can actually help in situations where you can't mandate, but instead need to provide guide rails. And this is the situation with ASEAN because, as you know, ASEAN works by consensus and it doesn't subrogate the rights of member states to legislate and create rules for themselves. But nevertheless, in the financial sector, the ASEAN regulators have been able to come together to create the guide rails necessary for an environment to be able to direct action. Next slide, please. So I'll first start off. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, thank you. I'll just start off by talking about the role of regulators and the markets, because this is particularly important for the financial sector. So what really drives the market? The fact is that regulators and regulations are the roads. So regulators can build roads through regulations, but it's industry and the market that puts the cars on the road. And that's a very important principle for us to remember. Next slide, please. So the financial markets have always been very aware that there are really three drivers to any form of outcomes that we want. The first is actually self-discipline. And this is where the parties themselves discipline themselves, understand what they must do in order to meet a particular outcome or particular goal. But often, because that is really overridden by self-interest, the market comes in to help guide that. And the market as a force is extremely powerful, but self-discipline and market discipline actually do, in a way, have gaps. So where these gaps exist, regulatory discipline needs to come in. So this is how the three drivers really work together. Self-discipline and market discipline try and drive at the forefront, but where they fail, regulatory discipline must come in to fill that gap. Next slide, please. So what is ASEAN doing? And the next slide. In ASEAN, the Sustainable Finance Agenda, and I'll speak specifically to this agenda because I think it's an interesting area to explore how guidelines and regulatory direction is being used. In the sustainable finance area, the ASEAN finance regulators have come up with three guidances that essentially form the blueprint for how we are going to execute this agenda in Southeast Asia. So the first is the ASEAN Capital Market Forum's roadmap for ASEAN Sustainable Capital Markets, supplemented by an action plan that the ACMF has issued. The second is the Working Committee on Capital Market Development's report on promoting sustainable finance in ASEAN. And the third is a report by the central banks on the roles of ASEAN central banks in managing climate environment related risks. Now, it's very interesting because if you look at all these reports, they provide very broad guidance and regulatory ambition in how to achieve the sustainability agenda and how sustainable finance can be used to do that, but it doesn't mandate or prescribe. Next slide, please. So if I summarize these three reports for you, they really talk about trying to focus on three particular pillars of the sustainable finance ecosystem. The first is a common language, which is the ASEAN taxonomy. The second is really on how we create a transition frame for ASEAN, because we can't decarbonize overnight, so we have to decarbonize over a period of time to avoid social and economic dislocations, to ensure a fair and just transition, and also to ensure that our transition is going to be affordable to the region. Both of these pillars must be complemented by disclosures because information is essential for us to be able to make informed decisions. And once the three pillars are up, it is essential to use these three pillars to activate the lever of strengthening demand and supply for sustainable finance. Next slide, please. So what is the expectation of regulators in deploying the three pillars and the lever? If you look at what the market expects, what the general body of stakeholders expect, is that regulators come out through formal and informal action to provide frameworks, to guide transparency and disclosure, to help strengthen the governance, and importantly, of course, supervision and risk management is something only the regulators can do, to facilitate products, services, and tools to get to this, to guide the transition journey, because sometimes when the market fails to, on its own, be able to deploy something, then the regulators need to be able to come in and do that. And of course, capacity building, because capacity building is something that may entail costs, it may entail coordination, and the market itself cannot do that on its own. So it may require the regulators to step in. The market also looks to see how regulators can provide incentives, and these incentives don't have to be through monetary incentives. It can also be through things like expedited approval, for example, and also how regulators try and provide the bridge between the demand and supply of capital. So they look at regulators as trying to help connect markets through all their actions as well. Next slide, please. So what are some of the examples of regulatory guidance that's been put out by the ASEAN financial market regulators in order to help meet some of these needs? One example for raising capital is the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, Social Bond Standards, and Sustainability Bond Standards that were issued over a period from the end of 2017 to the end of 2018. Now, these standards specify, firstly, what qualifies as a green, social, or sustainability bond, and specifies how these bonds are to be labeled, acknowledged by the regulators themselves, and reported to the market. This has been really successful, as I'll show you in the next slide. The second is that the regulators also came up with guidances on how to create an SDG bond. Now, this was very important because this was really a capacity building toolkit, because at that time, there was a lot of uncertainty as to what the process was. And the regulators came up with a toolkit. So if you contrast this against the standards, which actually are essentially almost a guidance, a rule, so to speak, to meet a particular labeling convention, the toolkit was actually for capacity building. And later on, the regulators also provided two other standards. The first is the ASEAN Sustainability Linked Bond Standard, and the second is the ASEAN Sustainable and Responsible Fund Standard, to provide clarity to the market again as to what qualifies as a sustainability-linked bond in ASEAN and what qualifies as a sustainable and responsible fund in ASEAN. So you can see that the regulatory guidance has come out for various purposes, either to create a standard or to provide capacity building. Next slide, please. So I talked about the ASEAN Green, Social and Sustainability Bond Standards just now. And if you look at it, what is the impact of the standards coming out? Well, the practical impact is that it managed to raise 43 billion US dollars through bonds labeled through these standards as at November 17th this year. But actually, I'm told that we have actually hit 45 billion as at today. So you can see it's benefited 7 of our member states. And the bulk of the money that's been raised is actually for sustainability bonds. But my point of all this is that having regulators come together, issuing a standard, even though that standard is not mandatory, and this standard is a voluntary standard, because if you adopt the standard, you can label your bonds using the ASEAN label, you can actually be able to create a very, very huge impact. Next slide, please. So the next thing that I want to talk about is actually the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, because the ASEAN Taxonomy Board is tasked with creating the ASEAN Taxonomy, which is a common language for all our ASEAN member states in terms of our sustainability agenda. So the ASEAN finance ministers and central bank governors had come together the financial regulators, to set up the board, and for the board to be responsible for an ASEAN taxonomy that is the overarching guide for all ASEAN member states, that complements their national sustainability initiatives and serves as ASEAN's common language for sustainable finance. You might note here that the ASEAN taxonomy is required to be inclusive and beneficial to all our member states to facilitate an orderly and effective transition to sustainable ASEAN. So you can see that this particular initiative is actually a very wide initiative that covers the 3 of the pillars that we spoke about just now. Next slide, please. So the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, again, has the, I would say, regulatory influence, because it is set up and controlled by the 4 ASEAN financial sector work streams, being the capital markets regulators, the insurance regulators, and the central banks. And every member state is represented. It also is overseen by the ASEAN finance ministers and central governors meetings. So from this, you can see you may not be able to issue regulations directly, but through the coming together of the various regulatory bodies, you can actually provide the necessary influence to help guide particular actions and initiatives. Next slide, please. So the ASEAN Taxonomy version 1 was published on the 10th of November 2021, and version 2 on the 27th of March this year. It has been very well received. In fact, actually, it has become a bit of a point of discussion on an international platform as well, because the concepts outlined in the taxonomy, and the taxonomy, I emphasize again, is voluntary, but the concepts outlined in the taxonomy and the approach taken is actually seen to be very effective by many people around the world. Next slide, please. So the next thing I wanted to talk about very quickly is the transition finance initiative that's being undertaken by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. And the forum is, of course, the coming together of the 10 ASEAN capital market regulators. But again, they do things on an opt-in basis, and they have been able to come together to develop a set of guidelines that would be useful to all the capital market participants in Southeast Asia, to define and try and work around what the transition is. Next slide, please. So there are many transition finance guidances and frameworks out there today, but there's been nothing specific to ASEAN, and as a result, it has been very difficult to deploy capital and orient capital towards this area. So the ASEAN capital market regulators came together in October this year and issued a transition finance guidance for Southeast Asia. So I've just come back from COP28. And it's very interesting to note that many people from other countries have actually spoken to me about this guidance, citing that it is extremely useful in providing the regulatory cover and the regulatory credibility for a particular pathway to be adopted. And they see this as a very effective way to try and move capital into the areas where we need capital the most. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to summarize about the lessons we have learned in developing regional frameworks and standards. The first is they have to be globally compatible, but they have to be locally or regionally contextualized. In a region like ours, they have to be inclusive and therefore able to accommodate different starting points and the different situations our member states are in. We need to encourage and not force. So one way to do this is to have the regulations or the rules, but have them on an opt-in basis. So countries that are not ready can opt in later. Countries that are ready can move ahead and set the stage. Of course, it's important not to lower the bar, but to create ambition that provides avenues to achieve the outcomes that we want. Next slide, please. So I'm running out of time, but I just quickly wanted to share with you what I meant about the importance for interoperability and global recognition. The ASEAN taxonomy, for example, is actually interoperable with the EU taxonomy. And if I can have the next slide, please. And if you look at how we have structured the ASEAN taxonomy, it is also aligned with all our national taxonomies. So in this way, while we have created a sort of meta guidance, that guidance is firstly aligned with all our national aspirations and efforts, and at the same time it's interoperable on an international basis. So I think when we create any framework standards, it's important for us to be able to ensure that we have that sort of interoperability to avoid fragmentation. So with that, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be able to share my experiences with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wong, for joining us, at least virtually, and for taking a different angle at environmental sustainability. Our next speaker comes from New Zealand. Ms. Julie Nin represents the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And I know, Julie, that your big passion is international regulatory cooperation and that you are the real mastermind behind the APEC OECD IRC resource. So I'm expecting a presentation on those two topics.
Thanks very much, Daniel. So yes, we're going to talk about international regulatory cooperation, which Daniel's already mentioned in his presentation. It's a feature of the recent OECD paper as one of the important tools for taking into account environmental sustainability issues in regulatory design. So for those of you who aren't so familiar with international regulatory cooperation, I wanted to start with just a quick recap about what it is. So I guess the way New Zealand thinks about international regulatory cooperation, and this is very similar to the way the OECD talks about it, it's really the way that, or the things that countries can do, informally or formally, to accommodate international considerations in the design and implementation of their regulation, and things that they could do to reduce the impact of differences in regulatory settings across countries. Now you'll see the first bullet I've got up there is that considering international regulatory cooperation should be part of our DNA. I think, and I notice this with colleagues at home, that often people think that regulation is the traditional view that it's you're regulating on a domestic territorial basis, but unfortunately that's not the way the world is anymore. So not considering the international impacts or effects on your regulation means that you're not necessarily going to deliver the public policy objectives you're setting out to do. So if it's not part of our DNA, if it's not part of our day job, then we're really probably not doing our job properly. So I would really, encourage people to be thinking about this. And it sounds from some earlier remarks from the Office of Council of State that actually in Thailand you're integrating this into your day jobs, which I think is a really positive thing. What we need to be doing is focusing on the interoperability or alignment of our regulation with those of other countries. It's about not thinking of ourselves literally as an island, but we're actually part of a bigger world, and things happen beyond our borders that will impact our work. If we think about international regulatory cooperation in our work, it'll help us to lower barriers to trade and investment. It'll increase policy and regulatory effectiveness, and it also is a way of enhancing capability and capacity, because some of us have gaps in our capacity. We're too small, for example, a New Zealand issue, or our systems are still maturing, so we can leverage knowledge that other countries have, and we can also build confidence and trust across countries, which is very important if you want to successfully regulate. So if we move on to thinking about how, and I'm just going to use the acronym IRC, it rolls off my tongue a little easier, so please excuse me for that, how IRC can support regulation for environmental sustainability. Now, I think Daniel particularly mentioned in the OECD paper the issue of global challenges. Some things to do with the environment are not confined to country borders. Water and air pollution, is an obvious example. So IRC can be useful to deal with these things because we can share evidence and impacts across countries, and we need to come up with common solutions. We can't solve these problems alone, but if we work with others, there may be solutions which will be really helpful. And this is where bodies, international organisations come in. These are some of the bodies which develop either international instruments or codes of practice or normative documents that we can all use to kind of help solve some of these problems if we all sign up to the outcomes of these. So for global challenges, IRC is definitely important. It can also be really important too in improving access to things like green technology or green goods. You can understand that if someone comes up with an innovative technology that might actually help reduce emissions or the reliance on fossil fuels or whatever, that if we all have slightly different regulatory settings about how that technology can operate, that may make it quite difficult either for that technology to develop in the first place, or it might mean that your country won't be able to benefit from the technology because it won't be possible to comply with your requirements on top of everybody else's. So in fact, if we come up with common norms and standards and solutions, this will probably make it easier for green technology to develop and to be able to be deployed across countries. So we need to encourage innovation and reduce barriers to things which will be good for the environment when we're thinking about regulating. Equally, if we want to restrict undesirable activities, we also might need to work together, because if we ban something in our country but it's allowed somewhere else, there will be possibility of leakage across borders, or those who are doing the undesirable things may be able to place themselves somewhere in the world where they can escape the consequence of their action. So we may need to cooperate on enforcement and investigative activity as well. So IRC is not important just for how you design things, but also how you implement or deliver your regulation as well. So we might need to think about some tools there. And again, for building capacity and capability, we can informally share knowledge and experience, which will hopefully help us all to regulate better and in a more environmentally sustainable way. So IRC is a very integral part of this discussion. And I'm now going to move into what you might describe as the sales pitch here. So I think the trouble with IRC is that it's a useful concept, but getting your head around it and seeing what it means and some good examples is a bit of a challenge. So a project that New Zealand has been leading at APEC and working closely with OECD colleagues has been developing the APEC OECD IRC resource. So it builds on cooperative efforts between APEC and OECD. It's intended to provide practical guidance and to build an evidence base too about how IRC works, about sharing thinking and experience, and it supplements an existing APEC OECD instrument which is called the Integrated Checklist on Regulatory Reform, which was developed in the 2000s. So if I can just... Unfortunately, oh, here we go. Oh no, gone too far, apologies. Okay, so the resources is here to help you in integrating this thinking into your work. So it gathers material and links in one place. It explains the different forms of IRC, because international regulatory cooperation is not one thing, it's a range of different kinds of responses and things you can do, and then you need to tailor them to the issue that you're dealing with. So we present the options here, which draws on the OECD work in analysing the different kinds of IRC, as well as a New Zealand approach, which is a spectrum that we've discussed previously in APEC, and we have our own New Zealand IRC toolkit as well as, which we link to as well as to the OECD work. It also has a lot of case studies from APEC itself, because APEC's done a lot of quite innovative stuff on international regulatory cooperation, and it also has case studies of some OECD initiatives as well. And there's at least one which involves a number of APEC economies, and we're hoping over time to build and add more case studies to the resource. So it's meant to be a living document. It's usefully, if I can get this slide to move on, is a website. We've set it up as a website so that it's easier to access, so that it's a bit more attractive to look at, and you can engage with it as you like. So I decided that the high tech of showing you the actual live website as part of my presentation was beyond my technical capabilities. So here we have a screenshot of the homepage, and I've put the link to the website on there. It's interesting. It's an APEX satellite website, so if you Google it, it probably won't come up. But if you have the link, you'll be able to access it. And I just thought, just to give you a taste, I would just also show you a preview of one of the parts of the resource, which is the start of the explanation of the different forms of cooperation. So you'll see there's an image there. The circular one is the OECD's sort of taxonomy or organising principle for how it describes these things. And then at the bottom, we've got the New Zealand spectrum. There's a lot of useful material there, a lot of really useful links. We've tried to make it accessible and hopefully useful, and I would encourage you to have a look at that so that you can use these ideas in your day-to-day work, and hopefully that will help with regulating for environmental sustainability. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, and we will conclude the set of presentations with a presentation from Indonesia, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Wahyu Wijayanto, and again I apologize for mispronouncing your name probably again, Director of Industry, Tourism and Creative Economy at the Ministry of National Development Planning. We are really looking forward to hearing about Indonesia's experience in developing not green but a blue economic framework and roadmap. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wahyu. Like Mr. Daniel said, I'm from Ministry of National Development Planning in Bappenas. First of all, I would like to thank the OECD and also the government of Thailand and also the committee for the invitation and also for the warm welcome. And also I'm here just to share the experience of Indonesia in developing policy design and also regulatory design for the blue economy development, and how Indonesia promote at the ASEAN level. Okay, as a background, Indonesia right now is, my office, in the process of formulating a new law on 20 years development plan, 2025 to 2045, and also since next year is general election, so we are preparing the technocratic draft of our 5 years development plan. So there will be also a presidential regulation on the medium-term development plan. And with this, in this document, blue economy is chosen here as one of the priority sector, along with industrialization, tourism, creative economy, and other productivity sector. And sorry. Yeah, why blue economy? Yeah, it's based on our modalities. Yeah, actually we have, I think, one of the biggest archipelago country in the world, and we Indonesia economy has an annual worth of around USD 80 billion, yeah, and also huge potential on coral reefs and also in marine fishing and among other things. So the blue economy is actually based on the law number 32 of 2014 on the ocean. So we are basically developing the blue economy roadmap along the corridor of this law. So in the process of developing our roadmap and also implementation, we are facing several challenges. As you know, the poverty rates among coastal people, quite higher than non-coastal, and also the existence of plastic waste, is also a huge challenge in Indonesia. You know, the potential plastic waste is around 12.80 million ton per year, and also tourism in Bali, as an example, also produce around 3.5 times waste compared to local people. And also there are significant portion of uncollected plastic waste. And also we see that the contribution of our maritime GDP is still limited, so we need to transform our blue economy into more productive and also with the higher percentage of growth. So as step forward, Indonesia has launched Indonesia Blue Economy Roadmap to encourage the development of sustainable and inclusive blue economy, and we are planning to have presidential regulation on this roadmap. So it will be backed by presidential regulation, and then it will be also included in our next medium-term development plan. So it will be the reference for ministries and also development partners, development actors in Indonesia in developing blue economy. So along with the document, we are also developing the so-called Indonesia Blue Economy Index, consisting of three pillars. First is sustainability, and then the economic side, the added value, and also the inclusiveness. And also, next slide. Sorry. With the document, in the document we also state the vision, mission, goals, and also the priority sector. So one of the goal is about the marine protected area increase to 30%, and also marine GDP contribution by 2045 is around 15%, and also marine employment contribution is around 12%. And also the priority sectors is about the fishery, agriculture, marine-based industry, trade, tourism, and the emerging sectors like renewable energy, biotechnology, bioeconomy, research education, and also marine conservation. And the result of our Indonesia Blue Economy Index calculation in 2021 shows that blue economy development needs to be strengthened. So especially the wealth of resources in Eastern Indonesia needs to be directed to create higher added value for prosperity in the region. And also the economic utilization in Western Indonesia needs to be directed to support poverty reduction and maintain resource sustainability. When you see on the table, we can pick Maluku province, for example. It shows the higher performance in environmental pillar and also social pillar, but for the economic pillar, it needs to be increased. So that's also an information for the government at provincial level to focus on the economic pillar, and also for the national ministries also to focus how to promote economic activities in Maluku province based on their maritime and also ocean resources. Next slide. Yeah. Indonesia Blue Economy Roadmap also encourage the inclusion of vulnerable groups, such as, we're promoting the participation of women and also marginalized group in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. And also, like I said before, we are also promotes the job creation in the sector, and also the support for the ecosystem, and also to support the welfare of the Indonesian people. Next slide. Yeah, the implementation of the roadmap also include various strategic initiative, project, and also financial instrument. It covers a wide range of project, from renewable energy to research and development, blue jobs, higher technology-based industries, and also about the digitalization, and also, for example, for the blue food projects, and also other strategic initiative. It also cover the potential financial instruments, like you see at the bottom. There are various potential financial instruments that can be developed. The Indonesia Blue Economy Roadmap also needs to be supported by cross-sectoral collaboration at national level. As you know, there are around 18 line ministries, and also coordinating ministry that involved in the formulation and also implementation of the projects. So it means it also related to their ministerial regulations, projects, and also programs. And we need strong coordination and collaboration at national level. Next slide is about how Indonesia promotes the Indonesia Blue Economy development at the ASEAN level. Indonesia is actively support blue economy development in ASEAN. Started with the 38th ASEAN Summit in Brunei in 2021, where ASEAN leaders declared their commitment to the blue economy. Indonesia moves to solidify this commitment during the ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. Key economic deliverables are proposed, highlighting the blue economy as new growth engine for sustainable development and a means to achieve sustainable development goal, with a focus on value creation, inclusiveness, and sustainability. These narratives culminates in the 43rd ASEAN Summit in September 2023, where a framework is adopted by ASEAN leaders to institutionalize this principle and objective within the region. And ASEAN leaders have expressed their commitment through declaration and have established a framework to guide their effort called ASEAN Blue Economy Framework. This framework is anchored in value creation, inclusivity, and sustainability, aligning with the ASEAN broader vision for 2025 and beyond, as well as the region's outlook on the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN aims to integrate blue economy effort with the global sustainability initiative, including the UN agenda for sustainable development, and also among other initiatives. Next. So this is the last slide, I think. ASEAN is charting a course toward the ASEAN Vision 2045 with the blue economy stated as key element to fostering regional diversity and culture. The ASEAN Blue Economy Framework, endorsed by ASEAN leaders, set the stage for an integrated approach, mandating coordinating council to oversee the rollout. The next step is 2024 includes the formation of a high-level task force, the governing of its first meeting, and hosting the second ASEAN Blue Economy Forum. Indonesia will continue a pivotal role in this progression, supporting discussion on blue economy under Laos chairmanship and bridging gaps in capacity and understanding among ASEAN member states. Finally, I hope that Indonesia effort is advancing in its blue economy will inspire more innovation and collaboration for advancing the blue economy issue in Indonesia and also ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and many thanks again to all the speakers, especially for staying more or less within the time limit, which gives us more than 20 minutes now for questions, answers, comments, and discussions. I'm really pleased to see such a big crowd in the room, so let's use this opportunity to have a little bit more interactive discussion. The international delegates have an advantage of having a microphone in front of them, but for the rest of the room, we have mobile microphones, so do not hesitate to raise your hand, and there will be someone coming with the microphone shortly. Also, I would like to remind you that we have interpretation, so if you want to ask your question in Thai, do not hesitate to do so. We will use this interpretation to understand. So, any questions from the floor, any comments, anyone wants to present their initiative to integrate good regulatory practices in environmental protection and green transition? Gentleman over there, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. My name is Benito Avianto. I'm from Indonesia. I would like to ask a question for you, actually. Now, talking about regulations should adopt with the global issues such as air pollution, digital transformation, and new technology. For example, talk about the electric vehicle, which is also become an Indonesian priority on ASEAN this year. Let's say what Malaysia said, the charging station, for example, it's because many variation of the charging station for every vehicle. So my question is, should we develop new regulations for charging source, charging station, or we look for the previous regulations, because there are a lot of regulations established, and OECD, the spirit of OECD also to reduce the regulations. The second one is how to harmonize between the central government, central regulations with the local government regulation, because sometimes it's not match each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these questions. Very good questions. I think it will be also interesting to hear about the Malaysian experience, because I'm not an expert in electric vehicles and in charging stations, and whether there is a need for new regulations. But from the regulatory policy perspective, from the perspective of good regulatory practices, we always need to ask ourselves a question if the existing regulations might actually cover the topic in hand, so those new technologies. That should be always the first question we ask ourselves. Do we already have regulations in place that are applicable to this, whether it's new or an innovative sector? Another question is to what extent we really need laws and regulations to regulate this, or whether we can use any alternative methods such as co-regulation, self-regulation, economic incentives. Government should be open to the use of alternative ways of regulating, whether it's outcome-based, whether it's principle-based. Definitely those regulations should not be technology-specific, because technology is advancing so quickly that we have a pacing problem. Governments usually stay behind these fast developments, so they need to react rather quickly. It's better to have technology-neutral regulations. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the process of how we implement those regulations. So whether we decide to use the existing laws and regulations or to adopt new ones, we always need to think about how these will be enforced and how compliance will be ensured. One of the examples of regulatory implementation is the licensing process. We should make it really based on some kind of risk assessment, risk management, to think about what is the potential risk stemming from using those new technologies, what will be the potential harm, what will be the scope of consequences, and then adjust the regulatory delivery system to that. So again, if the risk is not that high, asking, do we really need so many permits and so many institutions involved? And then, of course, lastly, we need to make it as easy as possible to comply with these regulations. So think about, whether there can be a one-stop shop, or whether we can use the existing one-stop shops for licensing procedures, and whether also regulated subjects understand those regulations, whether it's clear what the obligations are. To promote compliance, to explain as much as possible what is required to make it easier to comply. Before I will ask Madam Siti maybe to tell us about the Malaysian experience, to your second question about how to make sure that there is the local regulations and central state level regulations are in line. That's a very good question, and we have done some work in the OECD on multi-level regulatory governance. And of course, in some cases, it's not possible to force state governments, local governments to adjust their regulations to what are the priorities of the central government. And in that case, it is necessary to create some kind of a forum to enable discussion and exchange of experience and to explain what is the purpose of these priorities and central state level regulations for local governments to understand and sort of nudge them towards adopting regulations that will be in line with the central level regulations. Because everything that was said by Julie about international regulatory cooperation applies to intrastate regulatory cooperation. So again, we need to make sure that regulations inside one country are homogeneous. There are no unnecessary heterogeneities that would make the introduction of new technologies, whether environmental friendly or whether innovative, impossible because of these heterogeneities. Sorry, I took probably too long, so Madam Siti, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. So for Malaysia's case, to try to coordinate the efforts in setting up the electricity EV charging stations, so we've set up a task force which is under our ministry, MITI, So the target that we have is to set up 10,000 charging stations, which is rather ambitious, by 2025. But as we went along, we found out that there are numerous authorities and existing regulations that we have to cope with. So we've asked our colleagues under the Malaysian Productivity Corporations to sit down with all the various stakeholders. So in their review and looking at the existing regulations, we're trying to develop charging stations at along the highway at the R&R rest and service areas. So they discovered that there were 22 procedures involving numerous authorities. From start to finish, it would take 389 days, and it would cost the charging point operators as much as 170,000 ringgit to comply with all the rules and regulations. So they've done a series of consultations with the various stakeholders, looking at various aspects on how to remove some of the barriers to the licensing or to streamline it to make the compliance costs less, obviously, and also to reduce the time. So they anticipate that with some of the efforts that they are doing with the stakeholders and the various authorities to reduce the compliance time by 52%. But this is still a work in progress because we have to deal with colleagues from the fire and rescue department, from the local authorities, from the highway people, the Tenaga people, the energy people. So numerous discussions are still being taken, and we hope to come up with improved regulations that will hopefully reduce the time by 52% and also the cost. And inshallah, we hope that we will achieve the target of 10,000 charging stations by 2025. Right now, we can probably take an EV car up to the middle of Malaysia, but to reach the end with the borders of Thailand, I think you have to stop overnight and charge your car in order to reach the end up to Thailand and also up to Singapore. So this is a work in progress, but we will be happy to share what we have done. My colleague Azlin from the MPC, if any of our colleagues from the ASEAN countries would like to see what we have been working on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a really good example of reviewing the existing stock of regulations, I think perfectly in line with good regulatory principles. Any other questions from the floor? Any other comments you would like to make? Please. Hi.
Hello. Very good morning. My name is Abdul Rahman. I'm actually acting at Brunei Climate Change Secretariat from Brunei. I don't want to make up one city on the spot here, but I have a question on EV. How does Malaysia attracts the people to buy EV? I understand that the RON 97, RON 95 are still under subsidized, and we in Brunei face the same, that EV is not really attractive at the moment. Perhaps, yeah. Thank you, Puan Siti.
We are working to try and remove the subsidies. We hope to have more positive news next year from our colleagues from the Ministry of Finance. To encourage EV usage, we have, if I believe, there is a tax exemption on EVs. We're not charging them. So it's basically the cost of what the companies are charging to bring them in. We have also provided some incentives. Recently, in the recent budget that was announced by the Prime Minister, we are encouraging the B40s to switch from using motorcycles using petrol to EV bikes. So for example, you can purchase an EV motorcycle for over two years, if I'm not mistaken. It'll be announced, the details will be announced, and the government will subsidize a certain amount of your purchase price. We're working with various companies to make this affordable to the B40s. Especially, we have a lot of couriers, food delivery, service delivery people who are using bikes. So we want to encourage them to use EVs. This is in line with, we hope to achieve net zero by 2050. So this is our small effort in trying to reduce, because I think besides industry, the transport segment produces some of the highest greenhouse gases. So this is an effort to reduce the transport segment. So these are some of the efforts that the Malaysian government is trying to do to encourage EVs.
Thank you. Oh, I see two hands. So first we will go to our delegate from South Korea, and then gentleman in the back of the room.
Then I have one short comment and one short question. And first of all, to Daniel, thank you for mentioning Korean cases as best practice for regulation. But actually, I think that the case is initiated a couple of years ago. I think it's before pandemic crisis. Yeah, things changes these days. You know. Every country has some having some bad situation of economic development, and Korean government has changed it, and business people complained about environmental regulations. So it's not a funny story, but for most critical environmental regulation for detaining economic development, business people choose top of the one as a environment impact assessment. That's very stunning cases. So I think important thing is a political commitment, maintaining political commitments, and President more focusing on listening business people, not environments. Society, environment, every general citizens. So I think IRC is very important to maintain political commitment to some such as justice, APEC or OECD conference for emphasizing environmental regulation. It's very important thing. It's my short comment. And second, one question is to Julie. Actually, I'm very familiar with the IRC concept, IRC definition, and everybody says IRC is very good to reducing regulatory barriers, and it also makes some effective regulation. But I think in real cases, especially in environmental regulation, usually we make the higher level of environmental regulation as a result of IRC. We make a more better environmental regulation. Usually means higher level of environmental regulation. It sometimes conflicts with reducing the barrier of some international trade. So how do you think about this conflict of some benefits of ISD? That's my question. Thank you.
And it's a good question. I think the trouble is that there are often conflicting objectives when people are regulating. I think that the thing I would say about international regulatory cooperation, I think people often think of it as automatically meaning that you need to harmonise your rules with those of other countries. I don't think that isn't necessarily so. There are a range of different ways that you can cooperate, and I think it still means if your domestic driver is not just protecting the environment but also trying to keep barriers to trade low, I think there are still ways that you can cooperate and keep those and achieve your objectives by keeping those barriers low. It might be that you unilaterally do something. You might regulate the regulatory outcomes from other countries, but you might have your own domestic processes that are much more light-handed. For example, if that's what you need, you can use sort of mutual recognition type arrangements. There's a whole lot of different ways I think you could tailor a response that doesn't create barriers at the border, but also is focused on some environmental sustainability, but I think there is an internal tension there, and I think that IRC itself doesn't help you to decide which is the most important, but I think you probably need to think about the range of different IRC tools and choose one which perhaps best manages that tension. And I think, you know, if you want to keep damaging goods out, then, you know, you might have to put in a barrier for that. But if you want to allow technology and goods to come in that are environmentally sustainable, then you can definitely choose a tool that will allow that to happen. But I think the internal tension about objectives is something probably governments need to work out where their strongest priority is and choose the tool, that IRC tool that enables that to happen. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Des Tesso from Microsoft. Question for me is around good regulatory practice. What we are seeing is that, you know, in terms of, especially for technology, is moving quite fast, and you know, the policymakers are struggling to keep up with the technology. And what we are seeing around the region is that some policymakers just, you know, cut and paste from, say, a European digital translation, which I think if you go into, you know, the formula for good regulatory practice, you know, assessment or compliance costs is pretty high. My question for you is, how important is it in terms of capacity building, not only for the company and the other stakeholders who are impacted by the regulation, but as well for the regulators as well, in terms of your promotion of good regulatory practice? Thank you.
I don't know if any panelists would like to take the floor on that. I'm happy to.
I think capacity building for regulators and policymakers is absolutely essential, and it's requiring and is going to continue to require a significant investment by governments both in the OECD and in ASEAN. The themes that we're dealing with today are things which require a more sophisticated and flexible approach in policy making and in regulatory practice as well, whether it's environmental regulation or whether it's more effective engagement with stakeholders, or whether it's taking account of a wider range of factors in our cost-benefit analysis. And that does carry with it an expectation that all of us in government will be more skillful than we have been in the past at both analysing the issues and then designing regulations that keep up with both a complex world and, as you say, rapid technological change as well. I think that is posing some real challenges for all of our governments around when we face financial constraints, how do we actually invest in the skills for our regulatory and policy workforces? I think one of the things that we may discuss as we go on today is being clear about what the priorities are, because for a lot of our governments, we can't do everything all at once. And so one of the important discussions to have is, where do we get the most added value from investing in new skills and more capability and better technology? I don't think there are any easy answers, but I think we do need more highly skilled policymakers and regulators.
Thanks, Mark. This is exactly what we have been saying in the OECD, and but basically everywhere I speak about good regulatory practices and impact assessment, ex post reviews, I always get a comment or a question that someone is complaining, we don't have enough information, we don't have enough data, which might have been the truth 20 years ago, But nowadays, when we live in the age where data is the new oil and data is all around us, and your telephone knows more about you than your wife, then I think it's an excuse, and administrations should actually learn how to use this vast amount of data, how to collect them, how to process them and make use of them. But for this, you need analytical capacities in administrations. You need to create multidisciplinary teams. We've been always saying that regulations should not be left to lawyers, because you need economists, you need data scientists, social scientists. So it's really crucial to create those capacities in the administration. However, and we could continue on and on, of course, as Mark mentioned, there are budget constraints, and it is necessary also to share those capacities across the administration, not create them in the silos.
I think Daniel's last point is crucial. If I was a stakeholder, one of the things I would be encouraging governments to do is find all the ways you can of getting agencies to work together more effectively and to share the information that they have. And yes, there are issues with information sharing that we have to resolve, because we have to protect people's privacy and people need to know what is being done with their data. But I think all stakeholders in civil society will get much more out of governments if they encourage governments to get agencies to work together more and to share information more effectively amongst themselves.
And then if you don't have the data or information, ask stakeholders, because they will have them. But our time is running out. We could continue this conversation for very long. Let me thank all the speakers. Let me thank all of you for asking those interesting questions. And I'm handing over now to the chair from Malaysia to wrap up this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Again, thank you for all the speakers for the information that they provided and sharing experiences. I think there's a lot to chew on. So they provided slides, so you can go back and see what are the things that you need more information. I think our colleagues are more than willing to share their experiences and provide further information. So I think what has been discussed this morning kind of emphasizes the need for GRP to transcend beyond the normal things that we've been doing, to take into account the environmental aspects, not only experiences on the blue economy, but also on the financial aspects, capacity building. So there are lots of things that we need to take into consideration, and also to capitalize on the IRC that has been ongoing. So please be sure to check out the IRC website. I think the tools provided will help us, but it's up to you to customize to your levels of development. So thank you very much. And in closing the session, please be aware that we have a tight schedule. So coffee break is in for 15 minutes. It's we provided in the room next door, Chao Phraya room, and also in the embassy room. So thank you again. Please enjoy your coffee break and be back by 11:15. Thank you.